given that we're online again, I think it would be helpful if everyone introduced themselves in turn, and perhaps I can prompt you, but I'll start and prompt you to introduce yourself. So I'm David Forbes, Chairman of the Joint Internal Audit Committee. I'll just ask you as you appear on my screen. So Tracy.
Hello, I'm Tracy Latham-Green. I'm a member of the Joint Audit Committee.
Jason.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jason Harwin, Deputy Chief Constable.
Judith, you might as well introduce yourself. Can you hear me, Judith?
I think she's muted.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, I've got a bit of a lag problem. My name is Judith Seymour. I'm sitting in as an observer today. I hope to be joining you in February, though, as a member.
Okay, thank you. Moving round, Douglas.
Hi, Douglas Matthew, member of the committee.
Jim.
I'm Jim Gardner. This is my last meeting as a member of the committee.
Julie.
Hello, Julie Flint. I'm the Chief Finance Officer to the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Sharon.
Hello, I'm Sharon Clark and I'm the Chief Finance Officer to the Chief Constable.
Andrew.
Hello there. It's Jim's last meeting. This is my first meeting, but I've known the chair because he appointed me to the County Council Audit Committee a couple of years ago. So there's a bit of a relay race here.
John.
John King from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. I'm your minute taker for today.
And not on my screen, we've got Mark.
Hi everyone, Mark Lund from Mazars, your Internal Audit Manager.
And I think we've got Neil as well online somewhere. We do have.
Hi David, good afternoon. Members of the committee, I'm Neil Harris, Associate Partner at EY. I am picking back up the external audit of the PCC and CC for Lincolnshire for the open years of audits from Helen Henshaw. Okay, thank you again, Neil, and those of you who know Neil, he's been involved with us in the past. We already know that Judith's attending as a member of the public, and the other appointed member, Walter Lysenko, is hoping to join at some point as well as a member of the public. As members of the public, they will be asked to leave the meeting when we get to the confidential items towards the end of the agenda. As normal, we had a pre-meeting just prior to this, and we had the pleasure of Ian Holdenby attending to say his goodbyes. And we thanked Ian again for all his work over the past 8 years with the committee, and it now falls to me to wish the same thanks to Jim following his 8 years of service to the committee. I'm sure we all thank him for his professional expertise and for his eagerness to delve into all that detail and keep it all on our toes. So I'm sure, Jim, you'll have your last hurrah today on Glass Cube's IT security and future of the West Parade Police former HQ for Lincoln Division, which I know have been a couple of your topics over the years. So
yes, over the years.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. As normal, we'll take a break. If anyone feels I've gone on too long without taking a break, then just let me know, because it's quite a long agenda today, but we'll take a 5-10 minute break at some point during the afternoon. So if we can go on to the formal business then of today's meeting, any declarations of personal or pecuniary interests? No. Okay, thank you. Apologies for today's meeting. I am aware, John, that we will have had apologies from Gillian. If we can then move on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting, which seems a long time ago now, but of 28th April. Is everyone happy that these are a true and fair record of the meeting, and I can, at least digitally or notionally, sign these off as a true and correct record? Okay?
Yeah.
That's fine. Can we then move on to the summary, the action log following from the minutes, which is agenda item 4, which I think we had an amended version sent out a few days ago. Does anyone have any issues specifically to raise on that. We did get a recent update on item 362 to do with travel claims, which I think everyone will have seen. I was just interested in if there's anything that could be said in regard to item 364 in terms of the work EY were doing in terms of the procurement, and is that progressing in terms of allowing us to gain some assurance that that had been dealt with adequately? Don't know if there's anything EY can say on that in terms of their work.
So, David, I was going to cover this in my verbal update, but obviously the review of the circumstances with I can cover it in my verbal update, or I can cover it now. So,
well, if you want to leave it, as long as we cover it later on, then that's fine. Anyone got anything else on action log from the minutes? Okay. We also had a number of papers that Jason promised us in terms of the revised governance structure of the force, which were helpful in putting it all into context. Does anyone want to raise any issues with Jason on those? Okay. That being the case, then, if we move on to the internal audit section of the agenda, item 5, which is the progress report covering the end of last year and the beginning of this year. So do you want to pick this up then, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. Thank you for that. So obviously this progress report kind of covers finalisation of 2021 and then into the start of 21-22 as well. So the 3 final reports that were attached, well, four final reports for 2021 were in relation to workforce planning, commissioning follow-up, governance, and then the collaboration audit of budgetary control. I think in terms of those specific reports, I'm going to take them as read, but just run through some of the pertinent points and then just pause for questions, given how big the agenda is today, if that's okay, Chair. So the workforce planning audit, we ended up with a split opinion, just to reflect there was 2 distinct areas of coverage within that scope of work for us. One kind of covering the workforce planning, kind of business as usual operations effectively, and then we did a focused look on the operation, the officer uplift programme. So unfortunately there was kind of 2 priority 1 recommendations around some of the workforce planning areas. One being in regards to kind of lack of a central succession planner, where they were kind of a little bit more locally focused. And then there was another fundamental recommendation around a formal skills map to help with setting training going forward. So that kind of just resulted in the limited opinion in that particular area. Would you prefer me to pause there, Chair, and just go through each report and ask for questions?
Okay.
Through? Is that...
Any specific questions on that report?
I think Jason's got his hand up, Chair. I think Jason's got his hand up, Chair.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine, and I'll cover it because it's in the next stage anyway, so I'll cover it now. So, Mark, in terms of the 2 areas you've identified, we picked them up in the force with our colleagues with G4S about what we need to do around it. There is plans in place. The difficulty again is some of this links to the transition period. It links into a person being appointed that unfortunately has been off with long-term sickness that will be hopefully back with us very shortly as well to pick that up. But it also links into some of the wider work that we've been doing, and again, you're going to talk about the uplift programme shortly. Again, making sure it's all connected. So I'm accepting we've got 2 ones there that we need to prioritise, and we are prioritising. The important bit is I'm happy we've got things in place to address that in the short to medium term as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. The second final report was in regards to the governance, which again is pleasing to see that a satisfactory audit opinion in that particular area. Just 1 priority recommendation just around the timely reviews of policies and procedures, which I think is kind of an ongoing struggle of Aubrey's, but I think there's a lot of work to do in that area, unfortunately, given the amount of policies and procedures, but I think the management comments reflect the actions being taken in that particular area. I suppose I'll just pause for any questions on that specific report.
Jim, did you have something there regarding like financial contract regulations?
Yes, the current version on the OPCC website is actually June 2018 version, and last January we reviewed them the office has made a number of changes, or proposed a number of changes relating to things like leaving the EU. And at the committee meeting, a number of other observations were added in, and I followed up with some detailed ones in writing, but nothing has been incorporated yet into the regs. I have had communication with Julie about this, and her intention is to actually wrap them all up effectively into a new revision. I think one of my concerns about widening it to all the procedures is there'll have to be quite a significant review, I think, once the G4S transition is finished, because at the moment I suspect a lot of the procedures refer to G4S, so there'll need to be quite a major review. So I think this is quite an important area to look at the documentation, make sure it's up to date. Some of it perhaps needs to be done in a quicker timescale than other bits. And I think in particular, because the finance contract and procurement regs that are published now are so far out of date, I think it would be useful to actually review those for the current events as we know it now, prior to the G4S transition, and get them updated. So I don't know if that's reasonable to do that for the January meeting, and then perhaps table in some sort of report subsequently about how all the documentation is going to be reviewed to accommodate the changes post G4S.
Is that something you could pick up, respond to, Julie?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as Jim says, we've corresponded on this this issue. I mean, I have to sort of take it squarely on the chin. This sits with me. We do have a draft update set of regs, but they're needing just a little more tweaking, including, you know, taking into account Jim's comments. So unfortunately, it just hasn't got to the top of the priority list yet. But absolutely, I'm really happy to commit to getting that sorted before Christmas, because as we acknowledged earlier on, getting a firm baseline position in place before we then make more fundamental changes potentially as a result of the demise of the G4S contract, that's quite important.
Okay, thank you.
And what I'm happy to do is I'll go back to my previous notes and actually refresh them and send them through to Julie and copy the rest of the committee in, so that when you do get round to reviewing them again, you do have my observations as well.
Okay, thank you, Jim. That'd be helpful. Okay, Mark.
Yeah, and then the other final report was around commissioning follow-up. If you remember, in 1920 we had a limited opinion on some of the commissioning recommendations, so we've just followed up with those directly. Kind of pleasing to see that we've moved from the kind of limited to a satisfactory, with just one of the outstanding recommendations still there, although per the comments from Julie, I think it's almost been superseded, that recommendation, or covered off in other ways, I think. I'm getting nods from Julie, so yeah.
Yeah, because the response basically could be read as saying we're not doing anything about it, but that's simply because it's either not relevant or it's been superseded. Is that correct? Okay. So you're happy with that as a response, are you, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's the OPC does take a slightly different tact on publishing its decisions compared to other PCCs in the region, but it's within their remit to do that, and it's just a different approach to doing it, which is fine by me.
Okay.
And then the last report, which was part of 2021, was the collaboration budgetary control audit, which was a significant audit opinion with no recommendations. So that was kind of really pleasing to be able to report that into yourselves. In terms of 2021 work left, as it were, we're still waiting for the final report for collaboration workforce planning. It was slightly delayed because one of the recommendations referred to the OHU unit, which is the occupational health unit, and they've since subsequently had a new head of unit. So I've had a further conversation with them around that particular recommendation and the appropriate response that goes with that. So fingers crossed that will be with you as final report for next time as well. So in terms of 2021, I suppose there was nothing particular further to cover there. Unless...
Mark, could I just ask,
yeah,
we briefly discussed this in a pre-meeting, are you concerned about the IT governance and benefits realisation audits, because they were deferred from last year into this year, and it still doesn't look like you've got commitment perhaps from management to get that work commenced and underway.
I think Gillian has taken it up as an action. Obviously, I don't want to kind of speak out of turn with Gillian not being here in terms of what's done, but she's had that, was looped in that conversation where IT had kind of pushed back to us and said they've got concerns over capacity given the amount of change going on, which I think from my point of view is actually understandable given how much change and pressures will be going on with that. So I suppose it's more for perhaps a discussion with management to reconsider what's going to be appropriate between now and the end of the year from an IT audit point of view. Unless Julie or Sharon have a further update.
Okay, all right, thanks. Just one other point from me on this paper. In your table, performance table, table 3 on page 7, there's a few NAs in there, which I'm not sure is correct given it's the old year.
Yes, apologies. I think
it's correct for the current year in the next page, but I don't think you can have NAs when it was the old year.
I think in terms of performance, David, what I've actually included is a secondary table now for 21-22, which is actually a new format or new way of presenting. I was quite conscious that that particular performance table has been around for probably since we started the contract and might not necessarily give you enough information. So the table that's the new kind of 21-22 performance table just kind of focuses on some of the key kind of deliverables in getting the audits through to yourself.
Right.
And it's something that was kind of asked at another committee, and I've just kind of shared it with you as well to hopefully just help you give some oversight.
Okay.
So moving on to 21-22, pleased to be able to give you the final report for Wellbeing. My apologies that the table on page 6 is incorrect. It is a satisfactory assurance opinion with 1 priority 2 and 1 priority 3 recommendation. Apologies, that's incorrect. Appendix 4, where the details of the actual report is provided, is the correct version, so apologies for that. But in terms of the Wellbeing audit, Lincolnshire is aligned with other forces in establishing its strategy and governance structure and support for health and wellbeing, which is really pleasing to see. And again, the recommendation that we raised, which was the priority 2 around kind of having the management information, a bit more data to support some decisions, again, is kind of aligned to what we've seen at other forces around kind of maybe better use of management information and data just to support some of the decisions that might be made around wellbeing. But overall, a pleasing report to be able to provide to you. I suppose I'll just pause there for questions.
Okay, anyone got any questions on that item?
And just to provide a bit more update in terms of delivery of the plan, given we're quite a way through the year. The partnerships audit's been issued in draft, complaints management fieldwork's done, and draft report will be done shortly. The core financials audit, which is one of the kind of the key one within the plan, is scheduled to take place in a couple of weeks in December. And then we have dates aligned, so there'll be 2 audits January, 2 in February, and 1 in March. So we've kind of got it's going to be a tough quarter 4, I think, and maybe we'll have to work with management in terms of making sure that that's still applicable and doable. But I'm confident we'll still complete the plan by the end of the year. And in addition to that, the collaboration audit plan, which I provided in the paper as well, just gives you some further details in terms of we've agreed a more specific collaboration audit plan. I know collaboration audits have been a frustration of almost every committee in the region in terms of frustrations. So we've got a more specific individual audit plan, and therefore, whilst the audits again are scheduled towards the back end of the year, because they're individual audits at individual units, the hope would be that the turnaround time will be a lot quicker, because the previous issues have been with trying to coordinate 3 or 4 different collaboration units to give responses. So that just provides a bit further update on the collaboration plan.
Okay. Shall we move on then to your annual report for last year, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely, that's fine. So in terms of the annual audit opinion, we review a number of key factors in deciding when we get to that overall opinion, which is kind of highlighted across page 2, really, in terms of looking at the audits that were completed, engagement with the force, risk management considerations that we observe and see throughout our audits and through observation through this committee as well. And I think a moderate assurance opinion just reflects there was some areas of not concern, but limited audit opinions during the year that just indicate there's improvements that can be made within a couple of areas, which I think is a fair reflection of what happened during the year, to be honest. So I wasn't going to highlight anything further within that report, but just have to take specific questions or any further comments.
Can I ask you initially, what is the range of possible opinions you could give?
So it's in Appendix A1 of that report, David. It's on page 15. So significant is the highest rating, moderate is the second, then we have limited below that, and then unsatisfactory. So it's kind of second level out of the 4. In terms of
sorry, you've given the opinion as moderate. I was trying to understand, are there other words above and below moderate in that hierarchy, or is moderate?
Yeah. So significance the highest.
Yeah.
And then below moderate would be limited and unsatisfactory.
Right. So moderate's akin to satisfactory.
It's on page 15, I think, David, of the appendices or something.
Oh yes, sorry. Yes.
And your opinion gradings, it says.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was looking at the colour bit above. Sorry. That's fine.
It's not coloured, so you can't see it. It's all black and white or blue and white, whatever.
I did do on section 4 on page 8 and 9, those 4 limited assurance levels. I did go back and check, and I had to get Julie involved just checking on archives, that work has progressed on all of those, I think, from the Force and PCC side. So I don't think there is particularly any outstanding issues regarding any of those items still in terms of being live in the new year. It's just my observation, really. Does anyone have any questions then on the annual report?
I just had one, David, if I could ask Mark, just looking at the impact of COVID, are there any benefits coming out of possibly the different ways of working during that year, which will be helpful going forward?
It's a good question. I like your ways you phrased it, benefits, because a lot of people focus on the kind of issues that have happened with it, and I think you're right there. That in terms of the kind of control environments we are seeing that kind of move towards, efficient ways of working. Now that people are working remotely, your reliance on electronic forms of communication, electronic forms, electronic signatures, is kind of electronic signatures is certainly something that we've discussed with other forces in terms of strengthening that control environment and speeding it up and being more effective. I think what we've kind of done during the year in terms of the individual audits is kind of review how COVID's impacted on each individual control environment, and try to work out to make sure those controls are still there as a first place. But there certainly will be some benefits in terms of effective and efficient ways of working, I think.
Good, thank you.
Jason, you got your hand up.
It was just to build on that point, David. If you remember, we have submitted a report to yourselves as a committee about the review of learning from COVID. As we touched on, Sharon is now the COT lead for our agile working piece of work that we're doing. And again, embedding some of that across, not just in terms of agile working, but impact on the estate, all the bits around how control. And just importantly, it linked into Mark's other point around ICT benefits. One of the benefits we have seen is the fact we're doing this today is a benefit straight away, where we've managed to mobilise that very quickly. But we now want to push those benefits further, which is part of our aspiration, ambition for ICT going forward from April next year. So we are seeing some of it's live. It's had to be live because we need to continue to operate. But importantly is we continue to build on it. So it's not a case of COVID's going away, because it hasn't. We've got some good learning from it. We're building on that, and it's linked to our delivery plans in line with our force strategy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jason. So any other points on the annual opinion? Okay, shall we move then on to agenda item 6, which is the implementation report on internal audit recommendations. Perhaps it's just a case of opening this up for any questions from colleagues. Perhaps can I just kick off? It's more an observation. I don't know if anyone wants to respond, but it does seem to be taking an awful long time to deal with the 2 counter fraud recommendations. I think it's been outstanding for quite some time, and it would really be, because I see we've now got a deadline on both of those of the end of the calendar year. It really would be good if those could be dealt with and taken off the list. Okay, Andrew, you've got your hand up according to.
I concur with that, David. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I hope you'll forgive me, colleagues, for some daft questions in my first few meetings. I wondered if I could get a temperature check on how challenging are the workforce issues, both for officers. I suspect they are not so challenging, but for support staff, we hear stories of leapfrogging over people to get to high paid jobs driving lorries, or easy jobs stacking shelves rather than caring for people, etc. What is the situation for support teams to police functions?
Okay, not quite sure how that fits in, Andrew.
So just so in terms of, yeah, so in terms of establishment, Andrew, are we seeing a shortage of staff? Whether that be officers is not an issue for us. As you know, we're recruiting heavily at the moment. That is still a challenge though, so it's not as easy as some would make out. But in terms of police staff at the minute, yes, we do have some vacancies, but that's normal. Unfortunately, we do have vacancies. We are going through though a significant change through our future services programme with the G4S contract ending in April, and that in itself is creating not tension, but the fact that obviously it's some uncertainty for the staff that will be part of Lincolnshire Police post April, which then creates some potentially gaps in the system at the minute. So, as always, are we seeing significant reduction in numbers of people? No, we're not. Have we got some gaps? Yes, we have. Importantly, we continue to review the prioritisation around filling those gaps, recognising again from the 1st of April, the organisation will be very different to where it is at the moment with the G4S contract ending as well. Again, very happy if Sharon got any views from the force side of it, but that's where we see it at the moment.
Thank you for that, Jason. And I realise that the change of contract is probably going to cause a hiatus. People are going to inevitably be aware of it and or ask questions about it, etc. But in the longer term, is there great use made of apprenticeships within the support functions?
So yes, we are using apprenticeships. We've got ambitions to do more. Clearly, we're not a PQF force for a number of reasons without going over history why we're dead against it. And to be fair, we are still not fully committed. We've got to do it because
what's PQF?
So it's the police entry qualification framework. So it's ultimately you have to have a degree or get a degree upon joining as a police officer. We do have some concerns, which is evidenced about the fact it will disadvantage some members of our community, particularly our on the east coast, where they have not even got a level 3 qualification, let alone a degree, or like to get a degree, if I'm very honest. So, but in terms of your point around going forward with it, yes, it is creating some potential issues for us going forward. But we've got plans in place around that, and the apprenticeship is part of that plan to make sure we are attracting people early, and it's part of our attraction offer for our new recruits, where we are going to look at working with some of our communities that have got less opportunity to join in the normal entry, but we could do it through apprenticeships.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the actual summary recommendations? Most of those are complete. Okay. Shall we move off the internal audit agenda then, items on the agenda, to item 6, which is one of the standard reports on governance and compliance, or compliance with governance arrangements. Any colleagues have any issues or questions to raise there? I've got one, but I'll open it up. So, in the absence of anyone, so Andrew, do you have one?
I noted the proceeds of crime sum of 3,850. Is that a big sum, a large sum, or small? Is it indicative of the fact we don't have that many high value crimes, or what? What are you disappointed with that figure, Jason, or is that what you'd expect?
So, Andrew, the challenge with proceeds of crime, it can be a moment, and there's always a lag behind proceeds of crime in terms of policing activity. So, I'd always like, if I'm honest, and Sharon knows my view, is the more money that's in our pocket, it means it's not in criminals' pockets. So again, we have got, again, we're doing lots of work. A lot of this linked into the regional work that we do, because obviously around serious and organised crime particularly, and that's where we do get lots out of it. But part of our planning around our economic crime team, again, they have got not targets, but they've got means to again focus to make sure we increase our every opportunity to get that proceeds of crime back into the organisation. So yeah, am I happy where we are? Yeah, that's more money in our pocket than it's sat in the criminals at the minute. But as always, we are designed to get the money out of the criminal as well. Again, I think Sharon and Julie's got hands up as well.
Sharon?
I'd just add that, as Jason said, it's hard to plan for pocket income because it is variable. We can get a big case and we can get a huge sum recovery all in one go, or it can be small dribs and drabs. I mean, just as an indication, we do set a target each year, and some years we will come in under target and other years we will come massively above the target because it's not a regular income stream. This year we've got around 300,000 over the target figure projected this year, but then another year it can be at a very low level. So it's one of those things that, you know, we smooth it out as the years go by because it is unpredictable.
Thank you very much.
Julie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wondered if the question actually related to the spending of proceeds of crime income. Is that what the question was about?
No, it wasn't. It was raising the revenue. But tell me how it's spent, Julie.
Sorry, I thought it was to do with these decision reports.
No, it was just a general query about just, you know, which Sharon has answered very fully, actually, but it's not for us to tell the Chief Constable or the PCC how to spend that which they have, presumably.
No, I was just going to explain how it works, because the income comes in and goes onto the balance sheet, and then the Commissioner takes decisions on a as and when basis of how to spend that money. And the decision reports in this paper are about allocations from that pot of money.
Right, thank you very much, Julie.
Okay.
The one issue I wanted to raise was about the breach of the G4S governance arrangements. I note that there's an internal audit inquiry into that. Do we have a time scale potentially for reporting back to us on that?
Yes. Well, we've agreed terms of reference with our internal audit colleagues, and I mean, Mark may be able to update us, but making a start on that piece of work is imminent. So, you know, with a fair wind, we might have something for your next meeting, I would suggest.
Okay.
Yeah, like I said, as Julie and Sharon sent me an email this morning, actually just confirming that we can start with that piece of work as soon as possible. So we'll try our hardest to get it to next meeting, but it's just going to depend on a number of factors around availability at your end, our end, and I'm not exactly sure. I think if your meeting's January, I would suggest we might struggle to get it to that meeting, if I'm being honest, but we will do our best.
Of course, it may well be that this ends up reporting at a point at which the contract no longer exists. Which I don't know if that would cause any issues in terms of potential sanction, but no doubt we'll see on that. Anything else then on this report? Okay, we're now on to a couple of verbal items for which we obviously don't have any papers. And the first one is Neil from External Audit giving us an update on where we are on the financial statements for the last 3 years. We're up to now. Neil.
Okay, David, thank you. And I've taken the audit back on from Helen Henshaw, who's left EY, and I will be the key audit partner that will see through the remaining conclusion of the 18-19, 19-20 and undertaking the 2021 audit for the PCC and CC for Lincolnshire. You will recall from Helen's previous updates on the progress for both 18-19 and 19-20 audits that our external audits of both financial statements and value for money arrangements is substantially concluded, my understanding is two issues. Now, the first is to do with a breach of procurement, which has been investigated by internal audit and looked at by professional standards. We've been awaiting copies of the final reports from the internal auditors and also follow-up work undertaken by the professional standards team. And having had a conversation with the CFOs last week, committee members, I'm anticipating that very shortly I will be receiving the final reports from both internal audit and the professional standards teams. Those are intended to address questions that were raised by our forensics team in EY that are supporting me on the consideration of the events that have taken place, what did happen, whether that was a pervasive issue or not, and any lessons learned. Until I receive that paperwork, obviously I'm not in a position yet to conclude on this matter. I need to see that and form a view with support from forensic colleagues about whether or not there are any additional reporting obligations on me before I conclude the 18-19 and 19-20 external audits, and those obligations are particularly pertinent to the value for money judgment around procurement arrangements, but also whether there is anything else. But having the incident I'm aware of, actually the procurement did not actually happen. So in terms of any ongoing legality around any spend, that's obviously not relevant. So for the financial statements, it doesn't become an issue, but I think the opinion needs to be kept open until I've concluded on the value for money conclusion for and any additional work before we conclude both financial years. So that is certainly a substantive item. And David, you mentioned about seeking that assurance from the external auditor, and I absolutely understand why that's important. And obviously I'd be very keen to take a view from the committee members about the process in which you gain that assurance before we issue the opinions on the historic accounts and how the committee wants to be involved in that process. And from my perspective, I'm obviously very keen to expedite that now as soon as possible, because these audits have been held up for an extremely long period of time now pending this, and I think we're all keen to draw a line under this with the appropriate conclusions and move on to 2021. I suppose the only other item that I'm aware of that we need to pick through for the 1920 audit is a recommended adjustment that came out from our pensions consulting team had reviewed the McLeod adjustment in the 1920 financial statements and had reviewed the membership profile assumptions that had been included by your actuary, and believed that they hadn't been granular enough to the circumstances in Lincolnshire, and therefore proposed an adjustment of £5 million, which is material. We understand that Hymans don't agree with the position that's been reached by ourselves, and having had a conversation with Julie and Sharon last week, I think you are going back to Hymans to get an explanation from Hymans about as to exactly why they don't agree with the position that we've reached, why they can support the assumptions that they've reached on McLeod, and I'll need to involve our pensions consulting team to reach a resolution on this, because at this moment in time it's a recommended adjustment that's arisen from the audit and what we believe is more reflective of your membership profile, and given its material, I want to resolve this with an agreed adjustment if at all possible, and or if not, when we need to consider whether there's any disagreement in opinion before we issue the 1920 opinion on the accounts. But again, I'm looking to get that concluded in parallel with this outstanding matter on procurement, so that we're not doing one and then the other. We're trying to work through the two in parallel so we can get both of these audits concluded. And I'm quite keen to get this done before the end of the calendar year, or in time to potentially have a meeting in early January to conclude out on this. And the reason why I say that is that, and I know David and Julie and Sharon will be particularly aware of this, I held a session with the chairs of audit committees and CFOs across the East Midlands Police Force region to describe our resourcing position in EY and some of the constraints that we're seeing within the local public audit system at the moment, particularly for audits that are being serviced out of our Birmingham office, and try to put in place a more resilient way of delivering the external audits across the East Midlands Police Force regions for the 2021 audits, and we have a proposal to deliver the audits in what's called a hub arrangement with a resilient team of staff who have experience on police audits, but with the view of undertaking that work between January and March of next year to catch up with ourselves. But obviously for Lincolnshire, it's really important that we draw these historic audits to a close, because trying to move on with a 2021 audit with 2 open years alongside that isn't efficient or effective for anyone concerned. And obviously I don't want to put any further delay as much as I can into the 2021 timetable, because I'd like to get this organisation into a timetable that starts to feel a lot more consistent with where the rest of the public sector is in at the moment. Because I'm very conscious that you're in a situation with 1819 still being open, that you're now one of the few organisations that does have that level of open years of accounts, and we need to move on from that and try to get ourselves caught up during 2022. In terms of reporting, committee members, the intention from me is that you need to receive an update back on the outcome of the procurement work, on any outcome that has on our audit reporting for 1819. You've already received an audit results report on the 1819 audit, so it probably would be an addendum to that report. Now, my understanding from talking to Julie and Sharon, but also what I understand from reviewing the audit file that I picked up from Helen and the handover I had at the time, is that whilst we're substantially concluded on our 1920 audit, my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that this committee has actually not received an audit results report out of ourselves for the 1920 audit and received the final version of the financial statements to read alongside that. And if that is the case, I did agree with Julie and Sharon last week that clearly it's not appropriate to report on that outside of committee cycle. It's important we come back formally to this committee to do that. Now, I think there is scope to come back to you outside of committee cycle on 1819 if actually we have nothing adverse to say on the procurement matter. Obviously, if I think we do have something adverse to say, again, I think we'd need to route that into the reporting on 1920 as well. But I obviously want to follow a proper governance process to close out 1920 with you. I'm sorry there isn't a written update from me on this occasion, but we're in a bit of abeyance at the moment, which you probably can gather, until we receive this additional work and then can conclude from here.
I think in terms of reporting committee, I think you're right about 1819 and 1920. I think was, from our perspective, subject to the procurement aspect. I think the earlier year we're fine with. And I think our basic view was if external audit can get themselves happy about the procurement issue, then we'll be happy as a committee. I think we've minuted that.
Yeah.
I think you're right about 1920. I think we do need to see the accounts in final form and have your report accompanying that. And I think we're very open to having a meeting whenever. In January has been mentioned to do that. I'm happy to do that.
Okay, that's good. And I think that would be my recommendation, Chair, that as soon as we're in a position of concluding, I would recommend an extraordinary meeting of this this committee to just get all this concluded. Yeah.
Any colleagues, any questions for Neil?
Just one, Neil, is there anything else that could potentially hold up the signing off of the accounts? And I think it's important that we do press forward and try and get this resolved this calendar year. My worry is, it falls into next year and further delays. I think really every effort needs to be made to get that signed off by Christmas. Is there anything else that might hold things up?
Well, obviously, until we see the report from the internal audit and the professional standards and the final report and go back around our forensics team, then I think a lot of our work is dependent on that. There may be follow-up questions, and then we need to take a judgment whether the extent to which we're reporting out. Now, I'd want to conclude that before the end of the calendar year, but we are dependent on this information coming back to us in short order, I think, to do that, Douglas. But there are routine things that need to be concluded that won't hold up or delay the audit unnecessarily, but there are things like getting the going concern disclosure up to date to reflect the position 12 months from the date the accounts are authorised for issue. I don't see that as a particular concern, and I think the annual governance statement will just have a brief review to make sure that's still relevant before concluding as well. And then there are post-balance sheet events that we need to consider, all of which, given the passage of time, I think is very unlikely that we'd have anything else that we're identifying now that relates back to 1819, but we still have to go through that process of considering subsequent events. But these are all procedural things that we have to do at the end of any audit. So I just think it's concluding these two substantive points, and then we'll be able to move very quickly from there. And my target is to try to expedite that before the end of the calendar year and set up a meeting of this committee to resolve it.
Right. Yes, I was looking for any additional apart from the 2 points, but I think you've outlined there are a few other things. But I think as long as both you and management are clear of what are the other things to be cleared up as well, I think that's important.
Jim.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Neil, I 100% agree with you that it is important we actually expedite the open years and get them closed as quickly as possible. I mean, a fear I've got, I suppose, is that something new may come up, something related to COVID, for example, which no one's thought of up to now, and suddenly that means we're into another problem. So I think it is really important we get the two outstanding matters closed as quickly as possible. In relation to the procurement, I've got a fair degree of confidence we can do that, because I think that's within our own gift, within locally EY, professional standards, etc. I'm sure we can resolve that quite speedily. I'm worried though about the actuaries. I mean, if they've already had an exchange and they don't agree with each other, I just can see this drifting on and neither of them backing down. So that would be a concern. So I do think we've got to think of a way out of that, and we almost have a deadline. So well, if they haven't come to an agreement by a particular date, then this is what we're actually going to do. And I think biting the bullet and perhaps taking the accounts forward, recognising that this matter that you have to comment on might be the lesser of the evils. So I don't know if you've got any views about whether you share my fears that the actuaries may never agree.
I think, James, I do, because we had that very same conversation with Julie and Sharon last week, and sometimes with these things, when you get two different experts with two different opinions on things, it can morph into something which you don't, which creates unintended consequences. I agree with you that could drift on significantly. Now, all I would say is that we do have precedent on this type of adjustment on a number of other police bodies. So in at least 3 other police bodies that have used the same actuary, we've identified the same issue, and it has led to adjustments to the financial statements. Now, but if I put myself in a CFO's shoes, and I do understand this point, EY are recommending something that's coming from our own pensions expert as an adjustment that's material. Clearly, from a CFO's perspective, you need to understand why that is and seek your own. And the CFOs need to seek their own expert view on that adjustment and whether that's appropriate. And there's 2 options. It's very quickly getting Hyman's and our expert in a virtual room to try to sort this out, and then putting a deadline on it. And if that can't be done, and I have made it clear, and hopefully in my presentation I was clear, that as part of setting a clear target date on this, one option is we can't resolve this and there is a disagreement, that could lead to a qualification on the accounts because of a disagreement on this adjustment. Unfortunately it's material, so therefore I need to consider that as an option.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we need to perhaps think through that's obviously not a very good thing in terms of public perceptions, but it may necessarily be the better course of action rather than letting the thing drift on. I don't know if the CFO's got a view on that.
Julie?
Sorry, a better course of action is to go for the qualification, or
yes,
qualification.
If we can't get the actuaries to agree in anything like a speedy manner, what sort of?
If we can't get the actuaries to agree, then there is no other alternative, as far as I can see, other than to accept a qualification. It's not where we want to be, of course, but as Neil says, I'm sure external audit, well, you know, in my words, would be critical of us if we just put some numbers in because somebody told us to put the numbers in the accounts. You know, we need to be able to stand behind those numbers. So, you know, but let's see, because our aim is to get some sort of position that everybody can subscribe to, really.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else then for Neil? No. Okay. Can we move on then to another oral item, agenda item 9, and financial reporting finance review update? Julie, anything to say on that? Sharon?
I think Sharon's going to take this one.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I mean, we'd given an update about the finance review and the work that we'd done with SIPFA through the programme that they've put together. We got as far as having a draft plan to implement, which unfortunately was paused due to COVID and the way we're operating. We'd intended to pick it up again, but of course you'll appreciate that the decision that was taken in November around the G4S contract also impacts on the implementation of that plan, and it does need revisiting, because what we will have for next year is an in-house finance department that encompasses skills and people and required skill sets that we've not had before because they were outsourced. So we intend to revisit, but we have done some preliminary work to look at that, and in preparation we have already enrolled some of our staff and G4S staff on the Future Leaders programme. Now, this is the one that Gillian Holder undertook previously, and we have the current G4S head of finance and our own force accountant, so one from each side at the moment, undertaking that Future Leaders Academy with SIPFA, and then looking at what the needs of the wider finance department will follow.
Okay. There was some mention last meeting about qualified accountant input to help drive that forward.
Yes, there was. No, we do actually have a temporary qualified accountant in. However, given that the workload is building and building with regard to, as you can imagine, the bringing G4S back, that actually what she is doing day-to-day work that I'm delegating, and other members such as Sarah Parkinson, who is full-time on the Future Services programme, is taken up. That actually bringing one person in hasn't actually given us the capacity to actually revisit this at the moment. We're just keeping the day-to-day workflow going.
From my past life, I can identify with it. I certainly came across an issue where outsourced finance staff didn't receive training and development to anything like the extent that you'd expect them to. And when they were brought back in, we were able to pick that up, and everyone benefited from that, actually, and it gave those in-source staff far greater career satisfaction and potential to progress. So I think that's potentially one of your wins from re-insourcing the professional finance function.
Yeah.
Okay. Any comment, Jim?
Yes, just on that particular point, there was something I was wanting to raise similar on the agenda. We've talked earlier on in the internal audit reports about the HR function, about we need to look at critical training needs for staff in specialised roles, etc., etc. And what you've just raised here is the issue about the insourcing of the former G4S staff. And I suppose there are two questions, and one is, are we assured that we'll be able to capture all the training records and information that G4S have got in relation to those staff so that they come back in? And secondly, are we aware of where the gaps may be in other parts of the system? And I think, for example, in things like the HR staff themselves, are they fully up to date with current HR practice and so on?
Shall I take this? I'm quite happy to. In terms of our own finance staff, and actually wider, one of the work streams that falls within the Future Services programme that sits with Sarah Farmer and she's working very closely with Charlie Rimmer, who is the Director of People Services in G4S, and looking at the transfer of the records and picking up all of those issues in terms of are people qualified, up to date in their training requirements. That is forming a work stream at the moment.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Right, shall we move on then to agenda item 10, which is the Finance Governance Report, of which we have 6 different sections. So if everyone's okay, shall we just take each of the 6 sections in turn and raise any questions or queries with the officers? If that's okay. So the first section is the financial performance report for last year. Any questions, queries on that?
David, I don't really know where to ask my question. I just wanted to have an update on what was happening with West Parade, and I think
well,
finance.
It's in the risk register, I think.
It would probably be in the risk register. I'll wait till then. Then it is in the risk register. Well, but not well. Yeah. Okay. I'll wait then. We'll wait till then.
Can I just ask, Anders? Again, it's a bit tangential, but I know there was a comprehensive spending review the other week, and given I'm not directly involved, I didn't really go into the detail. I just wondered if there was anything in there that provided any hope or not for future funding for police authorities going forward. I don't know if Julia can comment on that.
I mean, the spending review dealt with the aggregates, and obviously with the funding, what we're looking for is the way of disaggregating those, national sums. So while it's not specifically referred to in the spending review, there is actually a look again at the funding formula has just started. Oh. And the PCC, Lincolnshire's PCC, as he's chairing the National Association of PCCs this year, and as as part of that, he is sitting on as a member of the senior sector steering group in the Home Office, and the first meeting for looking at that has happened in November. My sense is that that they're picking up some of the stuff that was done in the previous review. Right, I was going to ask that. Yeah. Where I sat on the National Technical Reference Group, looking at the statistical modelling, etc. So I'm hopeful that as a result, maybe, of being able to reuse some of that extremely good work that was done 2 or 3 years ago, that there might be some movement at pace with this. Having said all of that, even if a proposal comes forward, there'll be consultation on that proposal, and then subsequently, if anything is implemented, there's likely to be transitional arrangements. So I suspect we're looking at, a few years hence before we actually start to see any difference as a result. But at least it started. Yeah, that's really good news.
Okay. There's nothing else on the financial performance. The annual procurement review. It's B. There's quite a lot of detail there in terms of contracts awarded. Questions or comments? Douglas?
Yeah, David, I'm just looking at the contracts awarded that hadn't gone out to tender. A big increase on the previous year. I wondered if there was any underlying reason for that increase. Just looking at table 2.
Yeah. Julie?
I think some of this was referenced in the internal audit report on looking at payments and creditors and so on. Where it was noted some of the exceptional procurement action, it was retrospective, and I think that the actions taken as a result of that, to remind colleagues of the need to go through due process. I think, that action was noted in response to that internal audit report.
Right, it's just that you're looking at some, and I'll give you an example on top of page 16, speed guns. I mean, looking at the narrative there, I would still question, well, why didn't that go out to tender? A trusted supplier, fine, but are there other suppliers?
I think I'd have to leave that one to my force colleagues.
I don't know, Douglas, that's the answer. And again, I don't know the detail of it. So again, I'm happy to take something away and check on that, but I don't know the answer now.
Yeah, I suppose I'm less interested in the specifics, Jason. It's more, I think, the sort of fundamental point that, there seems to be an awful lot there. And if it's not following process, why are we not following process, and trying to get to the root of that?
Okay. Can I just raise something before I think Andrew has a question? I know we discussed in the past, we have some lines here, and I realise this is public report, that are redacted, which I guess the procurements are perhaps operationally sensitive or what have you, but perhaps it would be worth putting a line in the intro to the report just to say where something gets redacted, it's because of X, Y, Z. I think that just might help the reader a little bit. Douglas, sorry, not Douglas, Andrew, you've got your hand up.
Well, it's on the same theme as Douglas, actually, Chair, but my comment came with item 12 on the current mid-year procurement review. But when I read all these papers, I was struck with, well, to put it bluntly, my historical experience is procurement without proper requisition and order process should be a rare event, not several tens or in 50 in a period. Is there a fundamental disregard for the procurement procedure by some personnel?
Comment on that? I would have thought it was something audits would pick up if there was, but that's certainly not an impression I've had.
I mean, I would say I don't think that there is a fundamental disregard. I think it's an ongoing challenge as people change, there's turnover in jobs and so on. It's an ongoing challenge for us, keeping everybody up to date with, what should happen, etc. What I would also say is that the pandemic has presented particular challenges over this period. Our approach has been, there may be a pandemic, but we need to do proper procurement. So, that I know that hasn't always been the approach necessarily elsewhere, but we certainly have taken the approach that we need to do proper procurement, even though there is a pandemic. Nevertheless, some of the requirements have been such that exceptional procurement action has been required. And of course, exceptional procurement action itself is not disregarding the regs, it's following the regs, because it's making sure that if we don't go through a competitive process, there's a documented rationale and there is an approval process. So, itself, it's a proper manifestation of the regulations.
Jim and then Douglas.
I suppose the ones that concern me most are the consultancy, and this is always a difficult area, I think, in terms of procurement, because it is sometimes very difficult to find people who've got the expertise that people who've previously been involved have. But I suppose what concerns me is the Future Services Programme. A quick add up suggests, perhaps nearly £750,000 worth of money went out on the Future Services Programme. Was that not envisaged earlier on? And no doubt that level of expertise is necessary to actually deliver what is this massive programme. But I mean, I suppose were people aware of it for budgetary purposes, and was thought given to what is the best way to procure that in advance, other than going through with these ad hoc procurements?
Yeah, I mean, I do think thought was given in advance. You know, budgetary provision was made, and we came to a well-considered view that securing the services of, you know, some of the people who had the experience at, I have to say, you know, often very competitive rates compared with the market, was considered to be the best way forward by all of those involved in that decision-making process.
Okay.
Douglas, did you have something?
No, nothing further. Thanks, David.
Okay. Can we move on to the next section, which is debt recovery, Appendix C? It's quite straightforward. Appendix C. Okay. If not, nothing there. Can we move on to Appendix D, which is insurance services? And here we do have another item, some financial detail is there later on in the agenda for the closed session at agenda item 18, which I think was the cost of insurances over the year. But does anyone have any questions on Appendix D? The sort of overall summary for the year. Okay. Move on to the annual Treasury Management Report then. It's quite comprehensive. At Appendix E. Does anyone have any comments on that? If no one else has a comment, can I just raise the issue of internal borrowing, using your own cash flow in lieu of external borrowing? Obviously, that's been very lucrative, relatively speaking, and risk averse over the last few years. But as you increase the amount of your own resources, you use your own cash flow to avoid the need to externally borrow, then you increasingly take the risk of interest rates rising and having to go to the market and do that borrowing. So I just wondered, to what extent are you keeping that fairly crucial decision under review?
Yes, I mean, we're I was just going to say, we're really well aware of the need to, you know, keep an eye on that. I mean, of course, every year we have a surplus of cash because we get the pensions money in advance, the pensions, you know, from the Home Office. So, you know, it's not just about our own sort of internal cash flow, if you like. You know, we're absolutely getting a temporary injection of cash every year. So we're sort of balancing that with the need to borrow, and obviously cognizant of interest rate rises. Sorry, Sharon, did you want to?
I was just going to add that with our TM advisors link asset, one of the things that they do periodically is review our borrowing position, and they provide a model where you can compare the cost of carry against interest rate predictions, and we work actively with them to see when would be the best point to borrow. At the moment, we've had such slippage on our capital programmes that actually not taking further borrowing has been the right decision for us, because the rate rises have not been significant. But just to assure you that we do monitor this and do it in quite a sophisticated way, because we are looking at, you know, borrowing and the cost of carry and when the programmes are likely to be delivered.
Right. Thank you. Can we move on then, if there's nothing else in Treasury, to the last section, section F, this paper, which is corporate finance team performance. Any questions, queries from
David, I'd one. Can I just raise it with Julie?
Yes.
Page 37. So about the third paragraph down, moving paper in the processes, it goes on to say, without ensuring internal controls continue to operate. Question really is, should we be worried about that? And if not, why not?
I think that's poorly drafted, actually. I think it should be whilst ensuring that internal controls continue to operate.
That's a relief.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. You know, I'd be horrified if that's what we were actually doing. Yes, we'll take that away and redraft it. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Just a couple from me. And page 34, the first item, the medium-term financial plan, doesn't actually have any ticks associated with it. I'm assuming it'll be 3 or 4 ticks, but there aren't any.
I think it should be 3 ticks, actually.
Right.
Yeah. I thought when you said it to start with, David, I thought you said it doesn't have any text to say.
Oh no, we get to that. That's item 12 on page 40, but we don't have any text, which is benefits realisation.
Yes, I think I have an apology to make on that one, because I actually wrote that section in conjunction with our strategic development, because we do actually score very highly on benefits realisation, and I've had successful audit opinions. I think what's happened is perhaps version control in terms of which version of this completed document got sent to yourself. So I do apologise, because I know that section has been done. So we'll get an amended version to you shortly.
Okay, thank you. So have you got anything else on this paper? Okay. Can we move on then to the next agenda item, number 11, which is the mid-term annual Treasury Management annual report. Normally we would have had the annual report and the mid-term at separate meetings, but because I guess we've amalgamated these 2 meetings, we're having them at the same point in time. Does anyone have any questions on the mid-term report? I know these are very sort of technical documents. Can I raise one thing then from my perspective? And it's right at the very end, actually, on Appendix 2. It's noticeable, and I think understandable, that you're starting to lend money to slightly lower risk counterparties. If you look at Appendix 2 on page 17, I think it is. So whereas before you were really using the money market funds, the AAA rated money market funds, you're now starting to use A+ rated counterparties. Now, I'm sure that's absolutely within your remit in terms of the risk profile that you've set with your advisors, and I'm presuming you're doing it to get some return as opposed to virtually no return from the money market funds at the moment. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
One issue we've had, David, with money market funds is one particular one, for example, has ended up being domiciled in the Republic of Ireland, you know, in the post-Brexit scenario. Right. And so we were being asked to sign up to things which I wasn't comfortable signing up to. And also, I'm not sure that actually it's in line with our Treasury management strategy. Right. So right. I think that we haven't really got to grips with what Brexit means for Treasury management, frankly. You know, I think we need to have a look at that, and we're being quite careful in the meantime.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone on Treasury management? Okay. Shall we move on then to agenda item 12, which is the mid-year procurement review. Again, we wouldn't normally have that with the annual report, but just the combining of meetings has meant that we do have that this year. Any questions or comments from colleagues on the midterm procurement review? I note, just from my perspective, that there were 10 exceptional purchases. I'm presuming we'll get the detail of those in the annual report at this time, next time this year, as we've just had for the previous year. But other than that, I had nothing. Does anyone have any questions or queries on that? Julie, you got your hand up. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I just thought it was worth pointing out that, of course, this procurement is only a subset of all the procurement that supports Lincolnshire, because, of course, all the services that G4S provide to us, they do their own procurement.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're in the process of working towards thinking about, well, what will the procurement function look like next year, because the volume of procurement is going to increase quite significantly, and there'll be different types of procurement as well. Just thought it was worth sort of raising at this point.
That's understandable. Yeah. Okay, nothing else on that. Can we go to item 13, which is the balance sheet report? Okay, I think this is relatively self-evident. Any questions or queries from colleagues? Just as a relatively minor point that I noticed is that you also got this long-term debtor of 25,000, which seems to be due to probably some sort of error or misunderstanding regarding pension commutation, which I'm presuming someone's retired, taken a lump sum, and there's been no disclosure that there was a pension sharing order in place. I guess you're recovering that over, it looks like something like 25 years or 20 years. I wonder what will happen if the person passes away before the end of the 20 years pension.
I'll come in about that. You're quite right. The circumstance was that non-disclosure of a pension sharing order led to an overpayment of a lump sum. We are taking measures, and East Midlands Legal are involved, and 25 does represent the long-term debtor that is sitting on the balance sheet, but I can assure you that we are in fact taking measures to recover that debt sooner than the time scale given.
Okay. Any other questions on the agenda item 13? Okay. Shall we move on then to item 14, which is the PCC's risk register? Normally Aubrey, who's, I don't know if Aubrey's managed to get in. Oh, I've got an EW there. Have you managed to link us, Aubrey? Oh, you have.
I have, Chair. I've managed to wrestle my IT problems. I've got it in a metaphorical headlock at the moment.
Do you want to say anything by way of introduction of the PCC risk register, Aubrey?
No, there's nothing in particular I wanted to bring to anybody's attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Colleagues, questions or queries for Aubrey or Julie? Douglas.
Just a question on risk number 13, which is CO52. That's been at 16 for over 12 months, and I just wondered if there was any update, possibly Jason from you. Are we addressing that? Have we got any timescales for reducing that from a 16 level?
Sorry, does Jason want to take that one, Douglas?
I think Jason's on the phone.
Maybe.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if Sharon wants
I think it's over to you, Aubrey.
Sorry.
Does Sharon want to come in on that one?
Shall we?
Apologies, which one?
It's number CO52, item 13.
I just thought you could give an update on what's happening with the plans and supporting strategies like estates and fleet and so on. You know, those supporting plans are
yes, right. Okay, so in terms of the supporting plans, a fleet plan has been signed off now. Estates plan is in progress. We have one or two things to resolve before we can sign that off. There also will be an ICT supporting plan, and that is part of the work that the consultancy firm Exception are doing with us to formulate an ICT strategy for the future as we come out of the G4S contract. So those are being addressed, and Jason, our DCC, is the responsible person through the corporate planning cycle to pull all of those together through a concerted delivery plan.
So Sharon, do you believe you've got a clear plan then to address this level of risk?
Yes, I believe so. And having gone through the corporate planning cycle for this year, we hope to get those supporting plans signed off in full to support next iteration of the medium-term financial plan.
Right, good, thanks.
Andrew, and then Tracy.
Well, I may be pinching Tracy's item. It's West Parade and the increased risk.
I had my hand up first, Andrew, as well. So yeah, it's West Parade. And the other thing that I wanted to ask about as well is the whole. How do you feel about how the G4S transfer is going? Are you ready for the two things I just wanted a bit of an overview on? So
perhaps the latter is for the confidential bit of the agenda when we've got that paper at the end. So perhaps we could defer that one. But I guess
defer that, but West Parade would be interesting, especially as the PCC elections have taken place and the paper said that there would be a decision made on something after the PCC elections about town fund access monies. I just wondered what was going on, that's all.
Yes,
I can certainly. Sorry, Julie, go ahead.
I think as we've reported before, the PCC was working with investors in Lincoln actually, and they were seeking funding from the town deal. Unfortunately, in the last couple of months, I believe, investors in Lincoln have withdrawn from that proposal. I think they've been unable to make the whole thing stack up. So we've now, the PCC's instructed agents, and the West Parade will be on the open market pretty shortly.
That's quite disappointing, isn't it? Because we thought it would be a community asset, which is. If any other avenues of community asset been explored, maybe with other charities, the other voluntary sector people in the county? I don't know. It's.
I mean, prior to working with investors in Lincoln, quite a number of avenues were explored. So I think the investors in Lincoln option was at the end of quite an extensive process. So that's why reluctantly the PCC's come to the decision to, put the building on the open market.
Well done for having a go, anyway.
And does that suggest, Julie, it'll end up as residential?
I couldn't possibly, I really don't have a view on that.
Well, that's where the highest value is, isn't it?
I'm really not, I'm not aware of the sort of people who are in the market for that sort of buildings. So.
Can I just ask about the new risk of 54? What really can be said is why it's arisen now, this potential failure to have a strong working relationship with the police and crime panel. At face value, that's quite alarming.
I think that you know, there's been a need to refresh the memorandum of understanding with the police and crime panel, and there have been some sort of confidential issues which have been getting in the way of that. Right. So I think the intention is, you know, that is being progressed.
Okay. Can I also ask about the new risk of CO 56? I'm aware that in some parts of the country, the PCC is jointly in charge of the police side and fire and rescue. Is that, and I guess it's never been off the government's agenda, is that being given new impetus by the government to try and merge PCCs? Potentially in a forced way rather than, because it had to be voluntary before, I believe?
As I understand it, there is an ongoing review of Police and Crime Commissioner roles and responsibilities, and as part of that review, one of the areas that is being considered is whether to mandate the transfer of fire governance to Police and Crime Commissioners so that they all become Police, Fire and Crime Commissioners. So at the moment, we await the outcome of that review to see where government policy is going on that.
Okay. Anything else on the risk register from colleagues? Okay, thank you. Can we move on to item 15 then, which is PCC and Chief Constable's assurance map, the overall summary position. We'll come back to this item in the confidential section where we get each of the operational areas detail maps. But Aubrey, do you want to say anything by way of introduction?
Again, Chair, I don't think there's anything I want to say by way of introduction. I think the report is relatively straightforward. Thank you.
I think personally, I'd welcome a bit of a background to why we have the crime map area showing as red, but that might be something, I got to take Jason's guidance on this, that's best left to the confidential section. I know we've got some reasons here, but if you prefer, I'm happy to do that.
No, David, if we do it to the confidential, that'd be helpful. And again, it shows the system works. That's the important bit around it. And again, we had lots of debate, which of us is articulated in Aubrey's update to get us to these gradings. So yeah, very happy to share more detail around that when we get to the
I mean, what struck me was, just again, without going into any detail, you've got no specific areas red, but you're thinking that the whole is worse than the sum of the parts, if that's the right way of looking at it. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
You've seen our rationale, David, already.
Okay. Anyone got any questions at this stage? As I say, we come back to the assurance map later. Okay. All right. Okay. Can we move on then to towards the end of the open agenda? The terms of reference paper, which is item 16, where this is an annual trawl through our own terms of reference and code of conduct, and for picking up any potential changes that we need to have. Any questions from or observations, perhaps more pertinently, from anyone here on those three aspects? One thing that's occurred to me that I think potentially does impact on the terms of reference and the actual sort of more operational procedure document is, for now, what, 18 months now, we've been meeting on Zoom and we're continuing to meet on Zoom, but those documents make no provision for the potential for the meetings to be on Zoom. So it might be helpful, who knows where we're going in future, and that we kind of write into the documents that we can have meetings held via Zoom, so that the people can realise that this is a valid way of holding these meetings and the recordings are available to the wider public. So I just wonder, in those two documents, we should add something to facilitate Zoom meetings, and what people think about that. Julie's nodding, so
that could be done. Mark, you've got your hand up. Is that a mistake?
No, Chair, it was just I attended the police audit group conference last week, which was a virtual conference for all the heads of internal audit across all the police forces, and we had a number of presentations as part of that. One of them was from SIPFA, who are, I just thought it was pertinent for me to tell you at this time, because they are undertaking a fundamental review of audit committee guidance. They appreciate that it was 2018 when they last provided some further guidance for audit committee, so it might be that once that concludes, there'll be some further work for you to kind of consider as part of this item going forward. That was all I thought it was worth highlighting.
That's helpful to know. Thank you. And just another minor point from me on the procedural document, which is the last of the three documents. The paragraph 10, which is at the top of page 4, it talks about specific briefing sessions will be held from time to time as agreed by the CFOs and JIAC members. These will be held on the same day as formal meeting. I think we can get rid of that last section because we've had 2 or 3 of those, and I don't think in any case we've had them on the same day as the formal meeting. So I just think if we lose that sentence, it'll tidy things up and make it more compliant with that practice.
Perhaps, David, as well, replace that with these could be held virtually.
Yes,
as well,
yeah.
Because that's basically the reality of it now, isn't it?
More often than not, we want to hold those sessions via Teams, actually. Yeah, so something along those lines would be good. Jim, you've got a comment. You're on, I think you might.
Yeah, trolling back, I think there was a reason we put that in originally, and that perhaps might have been when the committee was relatively new. We had quite a few hour-long sessions on specific aspects of police operations or whatever, and I think the request was made, well, can we generally diarise those for before the JIAC meeting? So that's the history. So I think the briefing sessions we've had latterly have tended to be quite meaty. But that was the original intention for why that was in the 1 hour sessions.
Yeah, that makes sense, Jim. Thank you. Okay. Anything else then on the terms of reference? Can we go on to the future work programme? Agenda item 17. As you note, there's a potential, although we don't have a date, for there to be a meeting in January, hopefully to deal with the financial statements. Another issue that we'd like to have some consideration given to, and I did email this through last week, I think it was, to Gillian, so it may not have percolated further than that, was Jim helpfully pointed us in the direction as a committee of a recent National Audit Office guide on cybersecurity for audit committees in terms of looking at the organisations they're responsible for and what their policies and practices are regarding cybersecurity. And in that document, and it's quite a brief document, and I think Gillian certainly has it, there was a series of questions an audit committee should ask its IT department in terms of compliance with cybersecurity. So we felt collectively that it would be good to have a paper back to a future meeting. January might be possible if we're going to hold a meeting, and if it needs to be confidential item, it needs to be a confidential item, but just to see to what extent PCC and the force comply with those guidance matters as raised by the National Audit Office. So hopefully we could add that to the agenda going forward. And I know, Jim, you want to come in about specific IT security issue as well, but I don't know if that's okay, Julie, in terms of future item. Okay, Jim, did you want to pick up your point?
Well, it's just one of my concerns throughout my membership has been the IT security, because it's a major problem with the IT would perhaps have the biggest impact, apart from a nuclear bomb, on Lincolnshire Police that's conceivable. So I really do think IT security is of prime importance. I mean, there was one particular issue I raised, John King was going to come back on it, and that's really security about glass cubes, because in my opinion, it's no more secure than any other system. So I don't know if John's got an update on that, but perhaps it may be more appropriate to pick up the glass cube security in the context of that wider discussion on cyber security.
John, have you got anything to say on that regard? Sorry, Aubrey. Was it? Oh, it was John. Sorry, it's John.
It was John, I think. What's Phil still here?
Yeah, we've raised the question, and I understand that the Glass Cube's portal itself is going to be upgraded very shortly. So the considered view is that guidance will be issued to all of the users of Glass Cubes to remind them. I think this was around the auto logging out issue, wasn't it?
Yes.
As I recall, Jim. So just to put out some guidance at this point to all of the users about ensuring that they do log out of Glass Cubes themselves, because there isn't this auto log out facility. But as I say, because they're going to be upgrading very shortly this particular portal, and I understand that that issue will be addressed as part of that upgrade.
Okay, because I mean, to my mind, if you're doing a specification for a secure system, if it doesn't have an auto logout facility, it doesn't meet the specification. So perhaps that could be something again picked up in more detail when you review, when IT come back with a response to these questions.
Thank you then, Jim.
There's one other thing I just want to pick up, and that was the three-quarters of the way down. It's got the reviewed scheme of arrangement for the discharge of functions. They've found some contract regs, and we had the discussion earlier on. So I think, is it going to be feasible to bring something back on that in January?
I don't think it's going to be feasible to bring back the review in January, because we need to do the review in order for it to be ready for all the G4S stuff, and I just don't think we've got the time between now and January with everything else that's going on to get something to the audit committee. But certainly we'd want to get something pretty quickly after that. I mean, we've got a March meeting in.
Yeah.
That for me would probably be the one to target.
Yeah. It's just if there was a delay with incorporating the G4S aspects, and I realise that could be very challenging. It's to hold of it for that might not be the best way forward. But okay, if I leave it to the officers to think whether it's January or March.
Yeah, and I think there are dependencies with other activities before we can do the review of finance and contract regs, not least of which is what the organisation is going to look like. So, that there are, I mean, we can perhaps talk about this further in the confidential part of the meeting.
Okay.
Is there anything else then on the work programme? If not, this sounds like a very good time to have a 5-minute or so break, because we can then reconvene in the confidential section. That being so, then I'm afraid, Judith, you would have to leave the meeting, if that's okay, in the next minute or two.
Thank you very much for having me. I'll sign off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So can we come back? I've got a time, say in about 6 or 7 minutes time, and we'll resume in confidential session, if that's okay.